Welcome back to Medical Experts in Football. I'm Taiwo Adeshigben, the host, a physical therapist and sports journalist.
You have to be a lifelong learner in this business, not just because they make you do continuing education to keep your license, but because it's important because things change, right? Things
Right,
develop over
right.
time. And so you got to stay on top of what's new.
Now, speaking of license, I don't mean to do this. Is your license up to date? It looked
Yeah.
like it was expired on LinkedIn. It's up to date.
Yeah, it's up to date.
And that's the Senior Director of Athlete and Health and Performance for Real Salt Lake, a professional soccer club in Major League Soccer. He's also an athletic trainer who has been around for over 2 decades. So trust me, lots of good discussions from Utah, early days of Major League Soccer athletic training to the various roles he's been involved in to his current position as the director. Here's Theron Enns.
I want to first open it up. I remember I emailed you and I asked you a question. I said, where do you consider home? And you said, as a kid, you've kind of been all around. Kind of talk to me about that. Were you in a family that served in the military, or did you just happen to move from different states?
So my father was actually a minister. So I was born when
Oh,
he was in seminary. So he was finishing school in Chicago. So that's my birth city, but I
hmm
wouldn't call it my hometown because I don't think I lived there more than a year.
okay.
So he took his first assignment in Michigan, then he took his next assignment in Iowa, then he took another assignment in California. And by that time, I was old enough to go to college and break out on my own. So I moved 4 times as a kid. So
Wow.
there's no traditional hometown where all of the Enns family lives. So
Yeah.
um, I consider home wherever the wife and the dog are.
Yeah. And right now you're in Utah. Well, I
I
am
am.
curious from that whole journey from moving from 4 different states, was soccer always a part of your life?
Yeah, I played as a kid. I jokingly say my athletic ability left me pretty early in my life. So I knew if I wanted to stay in sports, I had to find a job that was around it. But yeah, I played as a kid. It was obviously a long, long time ago. Was not nearly as popular as it is now. But
hmm
I played ASO as a young kid in California and
Okay.
got my taste of soccer there. And it's always been a game that I've enjoyed. I enjoy other sports as well, but career wise, I ended up in soccer, and I've been here a long time.
Okay. Well, now you and your wife and your dog, what kind of dog do you have?
We have a little Jack Russell named Mimi.
Oh, Mimi, that's a cute name. Well, y'all are currently in Utah. You've been there since 2018.
Mhm.
And as you know, we have listeners all over the world, some that have never been to America. So, your time so far being in Utah, what makes it a unique state to visit? And what are some nice scenery spots that you like to go or visit, or that you tell someone to visit?
Sure. So Utah is a kind of an unknown state to people who don't live in the United States. It's a little bit of mountainy, a little bit of desert. It's not very populated compared to some of the other states, but we are in the Mountain West, so we have a lot of the things that you would love if you're an outdoors person. I've got ski slopes 30 minutes from here. We've got foothills 10 minutes from here that we can go hike in, mountain bike, camping, fishing. Probably the most famous thing worldwide for Utah is the Delicate Arch, which is down in Arches National Park.
hmm
So the southern part of our state has the big parks. You've got Bryce, you've got Zion, you've got Arches. Beautiful, beautiful national parks down there, and so that's probably what most of the world comes to Utah for. We just have it in our backyard. It's just a couple hour drive south, and we get to enjoy that.
Yeah, I've been to Zion National Park, which 2 days wasn't even enough to be in
No,
Utah
no.
personally, but I will definitely come back again. The people seem very friendly, and I never like to group people, but being a Southerner and
Mhm.
then doing my schooling in the Midwest and then working out in the West on the West Coast in Arizona and California, I feel like there's a warmness that Southerners have. But when I was in Utah, I felt people were quite open. Do you get that
Yeah,
overall? What's your
yeah,
the
I
people?
agree. I mean, they're generally nice people out here. It's obviously a small community. Most of it was founded by people from the Mormon faith,
Mhm.
so they know each other. They're close knit. But people who move here, they're very polite to you when you're here. I think it's a beautiful place. I've lived like now I think 7 or 8 states in my life, so
Mhm.
I enjoy it. It's got everything you want in terms of a city and the outdoors. So it's like a
Yeah.
perfect combination. And then obviously professionally, it's got a pro soccer team, which appeals to my work interests.
Absolutely. Well, I know you have a game tomorrow in St. Louis, so I won't take too much of your time. Now, let's get right into soccer. Obviously, you said you played growing up, but you've been around the MLS for a long time. Major League didn't start its first season until what, 1996?
Yep.
Knowing that you are also an Arsenal fan, I have a question for you. Which Arsenal legend played in the MLS and for which team?
Well, there's a bunch that have actually come over here. There's a lot more
But there's a
connections.
legend. There's
But the
one.
legend would be Thierry Henry. I mean,
Very
Thierry
good.
came over and played in Red Bull. It was cool to watch him. Like, when you're pro sports, they're the people you work with. They're your coworkers. It's that kind of fanboy thing kind of goes away, right? And they
Right.
just become the people you work with. You get to know them as people, and there's still a little bit of that when some of those bigger names come over. People that
Yeah.
you watch, and Arsenal's my one guilty pleasure that I allow myself to kind of be a fanboy for. But it's
Yeah.
because I don't work in that level, right? So I
Absolutely.
can kind of be the fan, not the clinician, and that's hard sometimes when people think about pro sports because they want to be the fan, but you have to be a dedicated pro and treat them all
Yep.
the same, and kind of get past the fame and glory of pro sports because in the end, it's a lot of hard work.
Absolutely. And I only know this because Thierry Henry was my favorite player growing up watching him as a striker. And I enjoy now him being a pundit on CBS because he's pretty good at it. But anyhow, I know you get this all the time. You're athletic trainer. Now you are the senior director of health and performance, which we'll get to that. But before we do that, what actually sparked your interest to pursue athletic training early on?
Sure. So, like I said, I dabbled in a few sports when I was a kid. I played some baseball. I played some flag football. I played soccer. I liked playing roller hockey with my buddies. I grew up in Southern California. There wasn't much ice back then.
Uh-huh.
But I love sports, like any young boy growing up. I love playing sports. As I got in high school, I was introduced to the athletic trainer at our school. Again, my athletic ability had left me. I wasn't playing any high level sports at that point, but
Uh-huh.
it intrigued me. I was like, "Ooh, athletic training. That sounds like a cool career." My intention was to go to college and register as a pre med because I thought I wanted to be a sports doctor because I thought, okay, this is a good paying job and you'll be around sports. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, the team doctor is only there on game days, maybe
Yeah.
once during the week. I said, I want to be around the team all the time. And so the college that I ended up enrolling at, Point Loma Nazarene College, had a program in athletic training. And I want to say within probably my first week of arriving, I changed my major and haven't regretted it since.
Wow. Athletic training has been around since the 1800s. Wasn't until what, 1950s, the National Association kind of got these standards for all future athletic trainings. And you were around when you first needed your bachelor's degree to practice, but you went on to get your master's degree. As this profession has been evolving, what has been the biggest adjustment you've seen throughout these years?
Well, obviously, the educational requirements have changed. You mentioned when I started, you could still get in with a bachelor's degree. There were a few accredited programs back then, but they did have an internship route. So if you took a number of core classes, even if it wasn't a accredited program, as long as you did 1,800 hours of internship experience, you could then have your advisor sign off and you could sit and take the exam. So that's how I got into the profession. When I went looking for a grad program, I wanted one that was a certified program. And back then there was probably only 6 or 8 of them. So I ended up at Western Michigan, which was an accredited program. But now we see that as the entry level. So the
Right.
profession has gotten more advanced in terms of you need to be smarter and have a higher degree just to get started.
Yeah.
There's something to be said. The argument of maybe they're missing out on a little bit of that experience as they're, in their undergrad, but I think people are doing a better job of a higher pass rate, having better scores, having better knowledge as they enter the profession. But that may have come at a little bit of a sacrifice of those years of experience at the undergrad level of seeing how it goes. Because, like any service profession, whether it's physical therapy or athletic training or medicine, it's almost like you got to get those repetitions and see
Mhm.
things and have that experience. And so I think that's probably the only change that's really happened.
Yeah.
But for me, yeah, I mean, I think we're headed in the right direction. I think the masters is important. Obviously, you have to be a lifelong learner in this business, not just because they make you do continuing education to keep your license, but because it's important because things change, right? Things
Right.
develop over
Right.
time. And so you got to stay on top of what's new.
Now, speaking of license, I don't mean to do this. Is your license up to date? It looked
Yeah.
like it was expired on LinkedIn. It's up to date.
Yeah, it's up to date. So it's funny. We have a credentialing system. I'm actually in charge of that for all of our staff. We have a credentialing system where you have to submit everything. And
Okay.
you go online and you click on everything. So I have a
Okay.
state license for Utah, and I also have a
Okay.
national board of certification license. So yeah,
Okay.
everything's up to speed, even though it may not be reflected. I haven't had time to update my LinkedIn that much. So,
I gotcha.
but thanks for calling that out. I appreciate that.
I figured it was up to date, but I
I'm gonna
wanted
run
to
and do
make sure I
that as
had your
soon as this
back on
interview
that.
is over.
Well, I know you said that obviously the educational standpoint that has progressed, but during your time when you were actually doing the schooling, like, how do you feel like going through that master's, what more did it add to your experience that you already had, maybe over how many years had you been practicing before you went on
I
to do
went directly from my undergrad, so I really
Oh,
didn't have anything. So I graduated in, I think, May, and I started my program in like July. So
okay.
it was a quick turn. Actually, I hadn't sat for my exam yet. That I sat for in like February of that year. So it was pretty quick. I was looking at it more from a look. More and more people are getting this master's.
Mhm.
I kind of put on my, see the future goggles and said, look, this is probably become a requirement. Yeah, I could just get certified with a bachelor's, but I better go get that master's now because pretty soon it's going to become, the standard. And so I'm glad
Yeah.
I did, because now it is an entry level thing. There are still people with bachelor's. They're excellent athletic trainers. There's not a requirement that they go back and get it. But I think it does help you. Like I said, things change, right?
Yeah.
I've been doing this, 2+ decades. I joke that some of the things you learn in school have been disproven and replaced with something else before you're done paying off the student loans for that first education.
Would agree. Especially if you're a lifelong learner, you will come to find that out very quickly.
Yes. Yep. You're paying for
Well,
things that are no longer valid.
well, using your goggles to see ahead, in your early days, you started as an assistant athletic trainer, as an equipment manager. Was
Yeah.
this in the MLS or NFL?
No, so I had come out of a season-long internship. They called it a seasonal assistant with the New York Jets.
Mhm.
And that really sparked my interest in pro sports. And I thought, man, I really want to work at this level. So that's all I did is look for pro jobs. And, I had an opportunity to maybe go into minor league baseball. I looked at this MLS job. The MLS job was an assistant athletic trainer, but they also wanted you to be the equipment manager. And I thought that was
Mhm.
kind of strange, but at the time I looked at like the NBA, and a lot of the athletic trainers were the travel secretaries and the equipment managers and the
Mhm.
athletic trainers. So I thought, okay, maybe this is normal in pro sports. I said, either way, this is an opportunity for me to get my foot in the door in a young league, because at the
Mhm.
time it was only 3 years old. I thought it's better to get my foot in the door at the top level of a sport versus starting like the bottom rung of minor league baseball and like single A ball and working my way up. So
Yeah.
I took the job. I knew I wasn't going to be the equipment guy forever. And, it was about a year and a half before I got moved into the head trainer job. So
Yeah.
I still give our equipment guy grief that I can do his job and mine at the same time. But no, it was a way to get my foot in the door. And I guess I use that now as an example to young students or colleagues that I work with. And they say, like, how do you get ahead? What do you do? And sometimes you just have to make yourself available. You got to
Mhm.
take that opportunity. You got to do that grind and hustle early on. Maybe that's not your ultimate goal is that position, but if you don't seize that opportunity, you may never know what it'll turn into.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, just so I can put this into context, how early in your athletic training career did you pursue that opportunity as an athletic?
So yeah, so I graduated from grad school, and I did a school year in the collegiate setting. So I was at Villanova University for a year. I
Mhm.
did men's and women's soccer, and then I also did indoor and outdoor track. I enjoyed the Division I level, and one of my colleagues there, he was the men's basketball trainer. I told him one day, yeah, I want to work in D1 sports or maybe even pro sports. And he's like, oh, you want to do pro sports? Well, hey, why don't you give me your resume? I know somebody. And he took my resume and gave it to the Jets and a colleague that he knew. And next thing I know, I had got an internship for the year in New York with the Jets. So 2 years into my career is when I then went into Major League Soccer. So it was pretty early. It was, the Wild West days of MLS, where it was kind of like a 6-month season and like a 4-month off
Uh-huh.
season. A lot of guys at the time, there were some professionals, but there was a lot of guys coming out of college like, hey, I'll do this for a year or two before I go to my corporate finance job that I got my degree in.
Yeah.
So it was a different time, and I was by myself as a head trainer,
Yeah.
because when I left, they didn't replace my assistant position for a little bit. So yeah, it was a long time ago. Things are thankfully much better.
Yeah. And given that time, the league wasn't as robust with all of these teams at different conferences. When you were obviously interviewing, applying for this job, once they brought you and had you face to face, how did you communicate so early on in your career that that you could do the job regardless of not having as much experience?
Yeah, I think the NFL internship definitely put a stamp on my career early on that I was capable of
Mhm.
working at another level. Because you got to remember, the NFL is like the pinnacle of
Yeah.
professional sports in our country. And so even though I was just a seasonal assistant, they knew if he can handle the pressures and the time commitments and everything that goes into that, he'll probably be fine as an assistant at our level. So I think that gave them confidence that I could do it. But I mean, just like our athletes, you still have to prove it on a daily basis. You've got to put in the work. You've got to put in the grind. You have to continue to prove yourself, because you always have new athletes or new coaches or new management that, sure, they know you've been in the league a long time, but they've never
Mhm.
seen it. They don't know how good you are at your job. So much like the players are evaluated on a regular basis, like, hey, what have you done for me lately? It can be the same way for staffs. You have to continue to prove that you're worthy of the position and that you're capable of keeping up with the latest trends and taking care of the athletes, because it does get more complicated. There are more athletes, there's more
Yeah.
staff, there's newer things, there's newer resources. So yeah, you just constantly have to stay on top of that and kind of prove yourself on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis.
Yeah. And as a young athletic trainer, having to prove, and not even young, just medical professional, proving yourself, what did you have to prove to yourself when you had those challenges early on working with athletes, and maybe you having to go through that? Were there any moments that you could remember in your career that really challenged you to think about, okay, why did I do that? And what can I learn from to help your career move along?
Yeah, I think early on it was about having the confidence and trusting yourself.
Mhm.
Because when I came in, I was working under a head trainer, and when he left, for half a season, I was on my own because we didn't replace the position. And so, literally, I didn't have much of a sounding board other than maybe my team doctor and our massage therapist that was part time.
Mhm.
So, a lot of it came down to having confidence, believing in your education, knowing what you're talking about. I learned early on the importance of not blowing yourself up and like making yourself sound like you know everything.
Mhm.
I think a lot of young clinicians are so nervous to say I don't know,
Yeah.
um, because they're afraid people will think, oh, you don't know what you're doing. You're not right for this job. I think the right answer is, you know what? I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to go find out. Right?
Yeah.
You need to go home that night and go, this guy asked me this question. Why don't I know that answer? Like, I would go home and I'd go back to my textbooks that I still had. And I'm like, okay, this guy mentioned this. I read about this once in a book. Okay, what do I need to do to be better about this tomorrow at my work?
Yeah.
Until you get that experience, that's all you can do is literally say, I'm going to find out. And, there's that imposter syndrome where you feel like you're faking it, but
Mhm.
you need to have some confidence and say, I can do this. I lean on your education and your experience, but also don't be so arrogant that you can't say, I don't know the answer. But the
Yeah.
follow up should be, I'll go find out.
I would agree on that. As a clinician, I'm not very old, but I still tell my patients sometimes I actually will go and look and see what that's about because I'm not quite sure. And I do think that this day and age, you don't want to come across like you don't know what you're doing, but you will never learn if you never admit to not knowing things.
It's
Well,
it's
I'm
a humility, right? Like, you
yeah,
have to, like, it makes for a genuine connection. They go, okay, you know what? This guy's not trying to shine me on and just pretend like he knows everything. I think it actually helps you if you say that, because then they think, hey, this guy's willing to go to work and learn for me.
yeah. Absolutely. And just for some of our listeners, because I have noticed, and you maybe can give me a little bit more background information, because in Europe, to me, it seems like they don't necessarily utilize like athletic trainers. Sure, maybe they have medical staffs that are trained in like emergency response training, but why do you think in America, like athletic trainers are so embedded, especially in obviously football and all these other sports, but not so much in like the European league, such as Premier League and Serie A? They have their doctors and their physios and massage therapists, but not necessarily athletic trainers.
Yeah, I mean it's a uniquely like North American degree, right? We have
Mhm.
the Canadians call them athletic therapists, which I think is actually a better term. In America, we call them athletic trainers. I think it's kind of an older term that can be misleading sometimes because when people hear the word trainer, which is often abbreviated to, they don't
Mhm.
understand like in soccer world, if you say trainer in Europe, they might think that you're one of the assistant coaches because you're out there to train them,
That's
or somebody
true.
might think that you're the fitness coach. So
Absolutely. Yes,
athletic
the
training
fitness coach.
is a
Yeah.
very much a unique American degree. So you don't see it in Europe. I think the only countries that I'm aware of right now outside of the US that have it are, I think,
Mm.
Japan and South Korea. I think
Yeah, somewhere
Ireland
in
has
Asia.
programs, and I
Uh-huh.
hear Israel is starting it. So
Yeah.
it's not very popular worldwide. They have physiotherapists or physical therapists, as we would call them. So that's their predominant healthcare provider in football teams around the world. And
Mhm.
everything's different, right? Like Europe is different than America on many different things. Educationally, you can have a bachelor's degree in physiotherapy and
Yeah.
start working. Like in the
Mhm.
US, you want to be a physical therapist, that's a doctorate degree.
I
Like that's a lot
know.
of schooling.
And
So
a lot of money.
and a
Mhm.
lot of money, right? Like we love to overdo things here in America. So it is very different. So like, I go to an international conference and they kind of don't know what I do. And I tell them, oh, I'm like a physio. They're like, oh, so you're a physio. I'm like, well, no, I'm not a physio, but I'm like a physio.
Yeah.
So I think America has just kind of created this very, very unique, very specialized, the traditional setting for an athletic trainer is a sports team. And
Yeah.
it's been that way, like you said, it formally since the 50s, but informally since longer before that. So I think that's why it's become entrenched in the United States as, the primary healthcare provider for sports teams. But
Yeah.
it's slowly changing. You're starting to see more multidisciplinary clinicians coming in, whether they're either dual credentialed or single credentialed in something else. You're starting to see teams, especially at the elite level, kind of broaden their approach,
Mhm.
try to have everything that they can in house so the athletes don't have to search outside of the walls of work to get what they need.
Yeah. And when you're talking to people trying to explain an athletic trainer versus a physio, what is the biggest difference that you see? Because obviously, as a physical therapist, I did take the emergency response
Mhm.
training just to have an idea too when I'm working with athletes, especially when you're in a clinic setting, you're working with high school sports. I always like to know what everyone else does. And even after taking that response training course, I was like, you know what? There's no way I could do an athletic training job without getting the experience out on the field. So I credit you guys because sometimes people assume, oh, they're just an athletic trainer. But
Sure.
everything I had to remember, like, I was like, okay, I'll just go out there and see what they do. But what is the biggest difference when someone is looking at, okay, physio in America versus athletic trainer?
Sure. I think the the biggest difference to me is athletic trainers are specialists in sports. We all we do is study orthopedic injuries, sports injuries. We focus solely on athletic injuries, how to care for them from the minute it happens to the minute they're, back on the field, all through that rehabilitation, all through that arc. I mean, even now it gotten into the prevention of injuries, which used to be more, the strength coach domain. So we
Mhm.
kind of see it through that whole arc. Physiotherapists, it's a lot like medical school. You get a really broad general training, and then if you want afterwards, then you can go specialize in one area. Like
Yeah.
physical therapy school, just I'm assuming like physiotherapy, you're going to learn everything from geriatrics,
Right.
pediatrics, neurology, orthopedics, maybe a little bit of sports. So you have this broad kind of general knowledge, and then you go focus from there. Athletic training from day one, all you're doing is sports. All you're looking at is how do we handle everything that happens in and around a sports team, from evaluating them when they walk in the door, to preventing injuries, to responding to emergencies on field, to doing acute care, to doing rehabilitation, to even long-term care. So I think that's the difference between the two. Not to say that a physiotherapist can't go and get some of that knowledge.
Right.
It's just not given to them in school. They have to go seek it out afterwards.
And that is absolutely accurate. You didn't go to PT school, but you are completely correct on that. But I am curious because I had a practical, because obviously you need to pass a practical for this emergency response training. And I think I needed to get something done safely in a amount of time. I think it was like a splinting. And honestly, I knew the steps, but I was so stressed. And I'm curious, like being an athletic trainer, has that helped you just be more calm? Like, because I felt frantic just trying to get through that practical. Do you get better at just being calm in like really tense situations?
I think it's an important character trait of anybody who wants to go into athletic training is that ability to remain calm. It's probably no different than people who go into like EMT or
Mhm.
an ER doc. You have to be able to handle a stressful situation, remain calm, remain focused, think clearly, and know the steps. And some of that comes to practice and just repetition of those things. Sometimes it just comes down to having the personality that doesn't get, flustered in those situations.
Mhm.
So it's important that you just remain calm. And yeah, I think it can expand into other parts of your life. I mean, I remember we used to live on a golf course in Colorado, and our dog got hit by a golf ball, and my wife was
Aw.
freaking out. And
Yeah.
I just was like, okay, we got to do this, this, this. And she's like, how are you so calm? And I'm like, I do this for a living. I see people bleeding and you got to handle
Yeah.
it. And it's just part of what happens. So you just kind of go into that work mode and lean back on your training and you do what
Yeah.
you know what to do and you go forward from there.
And when you were having and I actually want you to be honest with me because obviously you've been practicing for so long, but what was the first like really maybe traumatic injury or a situation that you were on the field for that you will probably never forget in your career that really kind of helped you in the future, like to really manage these stressful situations?
It wasn't so early on in my career. I mean, relative to how long I've been doing it, but when I was with Colorado, we were playing an exhibition game. I think it was in preseason, and we
Mhm.
were in Alabama, and we were playing a game. Our defender jumped up to head the ball, and instead of putting his arm out to keep space between him and the forward, they were
Mhm.
right next to each other, and the forward flicked back for the header as our defender went forward, and his
Uh-huh.
cheekbone struck the back of the forward's head and shattered his
Goodness.
zygomatic arch. And
Uh-huh.
so I just thought, okay, they hit heads, whatever. I
Yeah.
get out there. He's on all fours, and I can see blood not dripping, literally pouring out of his nose. And he
Wow.
looks up at me, and his cheek is concave. It is pushed in, and his
Yeah.
eyeball looks like it's about to fall out. And I'm just
Mm.
like, oh, this is bad. This is real bad. But I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, control your emotions because he's looking at you like in a panic. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was a scary looking situation. Probably the grossest looking thing I think I've come across so far. Soccer's
Yeah.
not nearly as bad as some other sports like rugby or
Right.
football for grotesque injuries, but I think it,
Yeah.
it really just kind of reinforced to me like that remaining calm that we talked about and handling
Mhm.
those situations and trying to reassure that athlete. And that's one of those incidents that just kind of sticks with you. It's in your
Yeah.
mind. I'll never forget that guy. I see him come across my page on LinkedIn. He's
Uh-huh.
successful business guy now, and I see
Yeah.
him come across. I'm like, I remember when your face was smashed. Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, it's great that he's doing well now. You don't ever assume that like, okay, I'm gonna have a concussion this game. I can read and then be ready. Like, as a therapist, we know coming into the door sometimes, okay, this one has an ankle injury. We can kind of prep for that. Aside from actual on-field experience, are there any things that you may have done outside of the actual pitch to maybe prepare yourself even more, aside from maybe obviously clinically being up to date on research? Are there anything else or any other things you did, maybe self-talk, anything like that to get you as prepared as possible for those situations?
Yeah, I think sometimes once you get into like one sport, you become more focused on the common things that happen. So you kind of know what potentially could happen. You
Mhm.
know that in a soccer match, you're probably going to be dealing with a hamstring or an adductor injury. Concussions are possible. You get better at those things. They become
Okay.
your walking around knowledge. Like those things like inside and out. But
Yeah.
like, if you ask me right now, hey, can you do a really good shoulder exam or a shoulder rehab? I'd be like, I don't really deal with a lot of upper extremity on the
Yeah.
regular, So those are the things I've got to go back and kind of review. So I think some of it is just your experience and time in a sport
Mhm.
or in a setting. You just become better at it, and you read more about those things because that's what you see more. Like, I can't tell you how many hamstring research papers I've read or adductor
Yeah.
research, or I look at those things. I don't spend a lot of time delving into finger, hand, and wrist injuries because we don't see a ton of those, right?
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of, those upper extremity shoulder, like swimmers, thrower problems. Like,
Yeah.
those things don't really come into our athletic training room. So you study what you're going to see a lot of, and you get really good at it. And in a
Yeah.
certain way, that's bad because you become so specialized. But
I was just gonna say you're more laser focused.
you are, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. We spend a lot of time when we're dealing with, I joke soccer is belly button down for the majority of our injuries, right? It's like
Yeah.
core injuries, it's hip
Uh-huh.
injuries, it's knees, it's hamstrings, adductors, ankles, and that's what you deal with. So you get really good at it because you spend a lot of time doing it. So you
Yeah.
end up focusing a lot of your continuing ed or your reading or your just general interest in, the current literature on the things that you're going to see because you want to know what's the latest and how can I get better.
Yeah. And obviously, like you mentioned, you've kind of stuck with Major League Soccer for all of these years, and you were around when the stadiums were pretty empty. And I think I was around when you turn on the TV, and I mean, I didn't even think many people were tuning in. At that time, why did you decide to stick with, I mean, obviously you played soccer, but what did you see about Major League Soccer? Did you see that it would grow? Like, did you feel that there would be growth over the years?
I mean, there's always that hope, but you never know. I mean, early in
Yeah.
my career, I was in Colorado when we were going to contract two teams in MLS, and my team was on the chopping block. There was like four teams they were talking about getting rid of. It was Colorado, Kansas City, Tampa Bay, and Miami.
Uh-huh.
Fortunately, it wasn't me; it was Tampa and Miami.
Yeah.
But it kind of scared me. Like, I'm only a couple of years into this. Like, whoa, this league's going to fold. Like, I hope
Yeah.
it grows. Like, I guess it's more just like a hope that it keeps going because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the guys, I enjoyed the travel, I enjoyed the games. For me, it was a good work-life balance
Hmm.
because it wasn't 12-hour days for, 19 months in a row. It wasn't anything crazy like that.
Yeah.
You hear horror stories about baseball where it's like 162 games in 180 days and
I
you never have a
know.
day off. And it's not that intense in soccer. It's
Yeah.
gotten worse. We're playing more games, but at the time it was easy for me to kind of get that balance. And like I said, I really enjoyed the professional level just because it's like the ultimate. Everybody wants to be at that level. They want to push hard. It's like the pinnacle of, my profession is to be at a professional level. And so I always thought I'm gonna do this as long as I can because I enjoy this.
Yeah.
And it has grown. I remember those games and we'd go to like Kansas City and there'd be 4,000 people inside of the Chiefs stadium and it was like empty. And now we
I
go to
remember
games in
too.
like Atlanta and there's like
Uh-huh.
75,000 people. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is what
Absolutely.
it's supposed to be like,
You know what I
like,
mean?
yeah,
I
honestly,
agree.
like it's so awesome to see it because like people are like, oh, are you intimidated? I'm like, heck no, I'm loving this. This is what we want. Like all these people, they're paying my salary. Come on, more people, come on out there again.
I absolutely agree with you. And I just moved back to Atlanta. So I went to a couple games last year. And just to even be in that atmosphere, I was like, man, this is good for America's soccer.
Yeah.
Now, but I am curious on your thoughts because if you notice in some European leagues, Premier League, Serie A, they have like two conferences, or I'm sorry, they have one league, like say Premier League, the top league, and all 20 teams play each other. But in MLS, you have 15 teams in one conference, 14 teams in the other conference, quite different from the European style. What are your thoughts on that? Do you like that you maybe play these teams?
Again, this is kind of like the athletic training, degree. It's a uniquely American thing, right? We're
Yeah.
Americans. We love doing things our way and nobody else's way. Like I remember when we used to do the shootout to end games in this league, where you dribble in on the goalie. You had five
Really?
seconds. Yeah, you were 35 yards out. If it ended in a tie, you'd have a shootout. So
Oh,
almost like
wow.
hockey style, where you like dribble in and then shoot on the goalie, but you had a timer. It was, I mean, we were
Wait,
making up
wait,
all
wait.
kinds of
What
crazy
year are
rules.
we talking about this? Because I don't remember that.
Well, it's probably before you were born, but Oh gosh, this was the early 2000s. I think this is how we settled ties back then. It was hilarious. Like
Oh, that's really
people
funny.
people looked at that and like, silly Americans, why are you ruining football? But yeah, we just like to do things differently. And so the
Yeah.
schedule's that way. And I think, again, we look at the NFL as kind of the premier league and they go, well, if they do their schedule that way, we should kind of do it that way. Because if you
Mhm.
look at it, you
Oh,
play
that
everybody in your conference and then you
yeah.
dabble in the other conference a little bit.
Oh,
So
that's
I
true.
personally, I think I would like it if we played everybody home and away, because that
Mhm.
means I would get to every city, in the league every
Yeah.
year. But the travel is so hard. Like it's so
Yeah.
far. Like
I
when I was
know.
when I was in Houston, we'd go to Vancouver in our conference, and it was a 5.5 hour flight. You know,
Gosh, yeah.
and when these West Coast teams, you hear about Seattle flying more miles than like any other professional sports team in the world, and it's completely true because like
Wow.
there was a map once on social media that overlaid the Champions League
Uh-huh.
locations
Yeah.
versus the United States, and basically like it'd be like going from like London to Moscow for them to go from Seattle to Miami for a game, you
That's
know?
insane.
And people don't understand that. They're like, "Oh man, America's that big?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's
Yeah.
huge.
It's really
It's a lot of
huge.
travel and long." And fortunately, now we do charters, so it makes life a little bit easier, more comfortable. But you're still
Yeah.
in the plane for that time, right?
Right.
It's not like we're flying on the Concorde and we're shrinking it down to a 2 hour flight and everybody's well rested. You still have like our team just got back from DC. That's a 4 hour flight through the middle of the
Yeah.
night, getting home at 2:33 in the morning. So it wears on you. I,
Yeah.
I don't want to complain because I know people like, oh, privileged life in a charter jet, but it's still a lot of
It's still
travel.
travel. Yeah, it's travel is travel.
Yeah.
And but MLS, what you all play what one game? Is it one game a week typically? I
Typically, it's
think.
once a week. During the summer months, it can speed up a little bit. You play like Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday.
Yeah.
This year, we have a new competition against the Liga MX teams. So it's like they call it Leagues Cup. So it's essentially going
Mhm.
to be like a World Cup group stage with knockout games. That's going to be basically all of July and early August. So the schedule kind of got pushed on either side. So we've been really busy. We're actually just coming out of a period where our team, because we've advanced in the other cup competition, the US Open Cup,
Yeah.
like the English FA Cup, we've
Mhm.
gone 4 rounds in that. We've basically played a game every 3 days for the past 7.5 weeks.
Oh
So
wow.
it's just a constant grind go. It's like play, recover, light train, play, recover,
Yeah.
one day off a week.
Wow.
So it's been a
Well, that's
busy time.
yeah, pretty intense right now. Well, before we get into your role as a senior director of athlete and performance, are you actually traveling with the team with all these games, or are you able to stay kind of more local?
So previously, I would travel. When I was the head athletic trainer, I was with the team everywhere they went.
Hmm.
So a year and a half ago, when I took this role, I purposely stepped back from that and said, "Look, I have
Hmm.
staff that will travel. I will go on select trips here and there. There's not many that I've done this year, which has been kind of nice. So
Hmm.
it gives me a chance to step back because my role isn't just with the first team anymore. I now oversee all of our teams. So not traveling gives me a little bit more time to kind of pay attention to our second division team, the Monarchs, or take a look at our academy,
Hmm.
or right now help with some of the planning that's coming up for our women's team, which is coming back next year.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
And Utah is one of the clubs where I think you guys have a really like pretty good youth program with the whole academy
mhm,
experience and all that. It almost reminds me of Europe because I did a story about a youth player that was trying to get to that academy to play professional soccer. Would you say that you feel that like that whole youth and then second and then obviously the top team, do you feel like we're kind of moving more towards like the European like transition and getting to that top league?
absolutely. I mean, I think that's been the goal of the architects of MLS, is to try and move in that direction.
Hmm.
They've structured the rules where when I got in the league, you didn't have to have an academy. Some teams did, some teams didn't. It was like part time, night training, nothing big.
Yeah.
Now it's become formalized. Every team must have two academy teams minimum.
Two
Uh,
academies
yeah,
are
so under 15 and under 17. So you have
oh,
two different levels at your academy level. Some teams will go even lower. They'll have under 13s, they'll have under 11s. But it's become part of the rules where having an academy gives you some flexibility on your roster. If you sign people out of your own
mhm,
academy, you
yeah,
can get some salary cap relief because they don't count against your salary budget for the
right.
first couple of years. So that's the incentive to do it.
Yeah.
We've taken pride as an organization here at Salt Lake in promoting people through our system to start at the academy and move to the Monarchs and then up into the first team. And so we're routinely signing one or two kids out of our academy every year and moving them up the levels. So for us, we're starting to see kind of long term for some of our players. I've got a guy on our team. He's been around almost 10 years through the academy and the professional. You know, it's a long time that he's been in one organization. So you get to see that. That's kind of awesome to see them grow and develop. Obviously, I haven't been here the whole time, but
Yeah.
you get to see how that system works, and it's something that I've taken to heart when it comes to my staff is trying to hire people maybe at the academy level, and when they're ready, promote them up the chain so they understand how we work. I'm confident in their abilities. Like, it's kind of on the job interview, watching them
Mhm.
to see if they're ready for that next level. So no, it's been an exciting thing for us.
Very cool. Well, let's jump right into your role as a senior director of athlete and performance. You first became sports medicine director with Houston,
Mhm.
right? Dynamo Football Club, I think back in 2014. At that point of your career, what made you feel ready to take upon bigger responsibilities?
Yeah, I think part of it was me wanting to do it, right?
Yeah.
Because there are some people that don't want added responsibilities. I knew at the time it was kind of a new role; it really hadn't been out there. But I recognized it as, look, if I'm going to be hiring people, if we're going to have academy athletic trainers, if we're going to hire a women's athletic trainer, I want to be involved in that process, and I want to kind of oversee these people, share any wisdom or knowledge that I've gained through my journey to try and make them better. So I made a proposal to the Dynamo to create a director of sports medicine position. I
Mm.
called that my night job. My day job was still being the head trainer, you know, every day at training,
Yeah.
traveling, all those things. But then the side piece was like working on, hey, how do we hire people? How do we get the right people? How do I make sure they have the right resources? how do I share the knowledge of what the organization has at their disposal? And so it just slowly became something that I developed over time. And when I came here to Salt Lake, I moved into that same role. I was a director of sports medicine and a head athletic trainer. But this new role came about for a variety of reasons. One
Mhm.
was I still wanted to move into a role like this. I thought this was the next logical progression after 20 plus years as a athletic trainer in the league. I thought a move into a director level position was the next logical step for me. I just
Mhm.
needed to put together my arguments and my reasoning to management as to why it was important. At the
Yeah.
same time, we had a staff member depart, and that was mid-season. And my boss, the vice president, said, "Look, everybody that reports to him, now you go through Theron until we figure out what we're going to do." So suddenly, I inherited all of the strength
Mhm.
coaches, the nutritionists,
Yeah.
and these folks were now coming to me, and I was their boss,
Yeah.
handling any requests or anything that came about. The third thing that came about, kind of all right around the same time, was COVID hit. And
Yeah.
COVID hits, and suddenly everybody in a sporting team knew their athletic trainer, right? Everybody needed us
Yeah.
for, hey, I feel this sniffle. Is it COVID? Hey, I
Yeah.
need a test. Hey, my kid is sick. Hey, do you have a mask? Hey, what's the new policy? Like, policies were coming out every day or week, it seemed like,
Yeah.
So suddenly I was thrust into a position where I was not only exposed to my team, meaning the
Mhm.
athletes and the coaches, but suddenly people from the president of the organization all the way down to the janitor were seeing me once a week, like, hey, I need testing, or I had to tell people, hey, these are the rules, or these are the things we're doing. So I think it opened up some people's eyes that I can handle a stressful situation, that I can handle something beyond just treating athletes,
Mhm.
that, I actually have some leadership skills that can be used. And so
Yeah.
those three things kind of came together, and I made this proposal that, I move into this director of athlete health and performance role. And it was something that at the time our vice president was like, yeah, this is great. Let's make it happen. So took on that role about a year and a half ago, stepped back from being the head trainer, hired my replacement. And now I
Mhm.
kind of oversee everything in our organization. And like we talked about earlier, we are two residential boys academy teams. They live on property in a dormitory. They
Mhm.
attend a charter high school, which is on
Yeah.
property. Then we have a MLS Next Pro team, which is the reserve team, so to speak, of the MLS team. And then we also have the RSL team, and we're getting a women's team. So technically, we'll have 5 teams under the RSL umbrella by next year. And so I have a staff now that encompasses athletic trainers, strength and conditioning, massage therapists, mental performance coaches, nutritionists, all working at the various levels, and they all kind of report up to me. So the head trainers
Yeah.
report to me, the assistants report to the head. And so we have a fairly large staff now at this point. I think we're 12, 15 people, somewhere in that neighborhood,
Yeah.
across those teams. And so, yeah, it's an exciting challenge for me. Spend a
Yeah.
lot of time organizing and having meetings and answering questions and putting out fires and, a lot of Zoom calls and emails and budget meetings and things like that. So it kind of encompasses everything,
Yeah.
with an occasional dabble of hands-on, like if somebody's sick and I need to step in and fill in as an athletic trainer, I can do that.
Yeah.
Occasionally go on a trip if needed. But mainly it's to support our clinicians, great people that we have here on staff, and
Mhm.
give them what they need to help them do their job effectively.
Yeah. I think that's fascinating that you talked about how you had like that director role as a side job as you were doing your athletic training job early on when you were trying to communicate to the people higher up that this position was worthwhile. Because as a physical therapist, people think I'm a little crazy, but I went into become a physical therapist, but then I decided to go into journalism, and I knew I wanted to use sports and injuries to be a sports and injury journalist. And half the time the producers are like, wow, that's really cool, but we haven't ever had someone do that. And so,
Right.
like you said it, I kind of am having a little day job where I'm taking the time of figuring out how I can show them and communicate to them that it'd be worthwhile having. So I think anyone that is trying to do something different, you have to almost be willing to dare and try, even if you have no idea how it's going to look like completely. So that's really
Yeah,
cool.
I agree with
Yeah.
you. I mean, it's one of those things where you kind of have to show them why it's needed.
Hmm.
And some of that is going to be your intimate knowledge of the situation where you work.
Yeah.
And then also saying to them, look, maybe it's being done similarly someplace else. Like when I was putting together this role, I leaned on connections, colleagues, people that I randomly found on the internet. I'm like, oh, that's a role that sounds like what I want to do. I'm going
Hmm.
to reach out to that person and talk to some colleagues, whether it was at like the collegiate level where you have like assistant athletic directors for athlete health,
Yeah.
or player welfare, or, a high performance director is another title that kind of oversees all these things. And so I kind of looked at all those different positions and just said, okay, if I had to create my position, how would I do that? And then kind of showed that to management and explained to them why that was important and what needed to be done. And, thankfully they agreed that this is something that was important. Again, the key thing was to step away from the day-to-day
Hmm.
hands-on care, because that's an all-consuming role. Like when you're a head trainer or an assistant on a pro team, you're only thinking about tomorrow's treatments, tomorrow's training, the next game, getting everybody ready. Like you get caught up in these little micro cycles of the next game, the next game, the next game. I
Yeah.
jokingly have said for many years that MLS is a marathon of sprints. You sprint from
Yeah.
game to game. Before you know it, 40 weeks of your life is gone, right?
Yeah.
So to be able to step back and kind of have that bigger 30,000-foot view is what I really needed for this role. And I said, it can't happen if I'm tied to a treatment bed and I have to treat people on a daily basis and travel, because
Yeah.
I just won't have the time to focus on it.
And for you, having that view of not being right on the field, obviously working with the athletes, for you, what's the most maybe consuming part of your day to day? Obviously, you have your meetings, but is there one specific role that definitely takes a lot more attention than others?
I think in any leadership or management role, it's about dealing with people, right? It's dealing with the staff and trying to make sure that they feel supported and that they have everything that they need. It's dealing with those difficult situations where they're frustrated with a coach or a player or possibly a colleague, right? It's being there to
Mhm.
manage those situations and try to get everybody pointed in the right direction. So I think soft skills like people skills are very important. It's not something that we're ever taught in any kind of medical profession, whether it's
Mhm.
medical school, physical therapy school, athletic training, dietitian. They don't teach you how to talk to people. They don't teach you how to, gain trust and how to diffuse tough situations. Like those are things that like you probably either pick up as you grow up or you're
Mhm.
fortunate enough that your personality leans towards having those abilities, right? Because
Mhm.
there's no class in school that goes, patient, uh, you know, conversations. You learn on the
Yeah.
job, and so it's one of those things that yeah, you have to develop those skills on your own. I find myself reading a lot of leadership books now,
Yeah.
taking some classes in high performance leadership because it's not anything that I learned as an athletic trainer.
Yeah. And speaking of that, because I'm sure there are some listeners who obviously want to work for professional clubs, whether that's in the MLS or overseas, wherever, what qualities, obviously soft skills are important qualities that you definitely look for when you're even considering an applicant, but are there other qualities or maybe something about their personality that makes you decide, okay, this person could work well with our team?
Yeah, that's actually something that I've been trying to focus on a little bit lately. Um, Anybody can have a great resume, right? I tell people that there are minimum things that you have. If you want to be an athletic trainer in our league, you got to have this degree, this many years of experience, all those things that you would put on a resume, right? Here's where I've worked, I've done all these things, right? There's a lot of people that have that. What
Hmm.
sets a good clinician apart is those things that we just kind of talked about. It's people
Yeah.
skills, it's demeanor, it's attitude, it's resilience, it's teamwork, it is all of these different things. And so, I tell people, just because you're educationally qualified does not mean you're going to fit into the environment. You have to be able to handle high stress. You have to handle long work days. You have to handle travel stress. You have to handle all of these different things and still perform at a high level with the skills that you learned in school. So,
Hmm.
I'm trying to develop different ways to figure out in the recruitment process how we identify that.
Yeah.
I've been having some conversations with our mental performance coach who has a doctorate in psychology, and we talk about, what is it, personality surveys that we can give people to find out if we don't know this candidate very well, how
Yeah.
they're going to do, right? Because everybody sends you like three references, right? Those are the
I
three
know.
people that are going to say the nicest things about them, right? I'm of course I'm going to call those people and ask them some questions, right, and get a general
Absolutely.
sense. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I also look at it and I go, do I know somebody who knows this guy, who could be like a
Yeah.
little bit more honest with me behind the scenes,
Mm.
or somebody that worked with them that they didn't put down as a reference, so that I can get a more true sense of who they are. And
Yeah.
you know, you hope that you have the ability to tease that out through interviews. And I was talking to my first boss in the MLS is actually in my role now with the Golden Knights in hockey, and they just won the Stanley Cup. Congrats to Jay, they did great. But we met
Nice.
up about a month ago when I was in Vegas for a game, and we were talking about just all these things. Right? He's so good at these things now, and he's like, you want somebody who is like giving with their time and
Hmm.
generous with their time and curious, someone who's always trying to learn and trying to get better, but someone
Yeah.
who always is generous with their skills and their time. And I thought, wow, those are two great qualities to say
I
as a
agree.
clinician in a people business that you should
Yeah.
have.
I like that. I agree. I think curiosity definitely be wanting to learn for yourself and
Well,
be
we
to
we
be
talk
better
about
for
being a
others. Yeah.
lifelong learner, but you can be a
Yeah.
lifelong learner because you have to get your
Exactly.
continuing medical education units, right? That's a
Yeah.
requirement. I mean, early on in my career, I was like, whatever, I got out of school, I'm done. I'm just going to take some cheap, easy classes just to fill this
Yeah.
requirement. But it leaves you kind of feeling hollowed, like, hey, I didn't really learn anything.
I
So you
know.
want people who are curious and want to learn, and that can be difficult. I mean, motivation waxes and wanes in your life, right? And so there are times you're on it and you want to learn everything about your profession. You want to take all these great courses, and there are other times you're like, I don't really feel it today.
Yeah.
So having that continual desire to be curious, I think, is a good thing as a clinician.
And clearly you knew that you wanted to be around sport and you have been through the ups and the downs and you've still been in it. If there was one thing that you would maybe tell someone that feels they're interested in working in the professional club setting that will help them maybe be more realistic on what the life is like to make sure that it's truly what they want, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think people have to be flexible. I think that's probably the biggest thing I would say. Whether it's a change in the schedule because the coach decides he wants to do a 30-minute video session that was supposed to go 5 minutes, or
Mhm.
flexibility because, hey, a game got changed in your schedule. Like, you can't live a rigid life in sports. You have to be flexible and kind of roll with what comes to you, and not getting too high and too low on those things. It helps. It kind of keeps you in the middle, right? Because if you're not flexible, you're going to get frustrated because sports is always changing, right? The
Mhm.
athletes are changing, the coaches are changing, training times are changing, travel is changing. And I think people need to be a little bit willing to give and flex with things so that it doesn't, drive them crazy that things aren't exactly the way that they are supposed to be and on this schedule. Like I say to a lot of people, like if they're coming out of like a traditional medical setting, whether it's physical therapy or athletic trainers worked in a clinic and they want to get into sports, like you've got to be flexible or you're going to go nuts, because team life is different than, anything else you've experienced. And having that willingness to just kind of go with the flow is going to help you handle some of those.
And it sounds like you have a very understanding spouse, because with, with all the changes.
I tell people this all the time. I love my wife, Marla, and we met when I was already a head trainer. So she met me and I was already doing this job. And so literally our first 2 dates were like a month apart, because it was like we had a date. It was the off season. I already had like 2 things planned. Like this is my only chance to get out of town. I'm going to Hawaii. I'm going to Florida. Like I was like, hey, nothing personal. I won't call you for like a month because I'm going to be real busy with vacation. but she knew like immediately. We dated for like a year and a half, and we were engaged for a year. So like she got that trial run of like, he's going to be gone every other weekend. And she's a strong, independent woman. She doesn't need me there holding her hand. I mean, yeah, she misses me when I was gone traveling, but it also wasn't one of those things where she was so miserable. Like she's like, I need you to quit your job. You've got to be here every night for me. She's got the dog at home to keep her company, and she can handle being on her own. So I think yes, having an understanding spouse is critical, because I've seen this stress of this job like hurt marriages, because it can be so stressful. I've seen that from coaches. I've seen that from players. I've seen it from medical staffs. So yeah, having an understanding spouse is definitely good. And so I think my key was the right woman who understood and can handle her independence. And also she started dating me and already knew what she was getting into.
Because the truth is, going a whole month without having another date, that can really be a turnoff. A woman could be like, I'm so done. But the right one understood. That's pretty awesome.
I tell everybody it was her choice to settle. I'm the one that overachieved.
You did make a comment about how, couples, it can be tough on like people's marriages. Yeah. At times, are you having maybe these conversations with your staff, like maybe that are having some challenges balancing that out? Like what's the biggest advice or that you can say? I mean, obviously you can't fix anyone's marriage, but has there been any advice that you've given maybe a worker that you oversee on just helping them get through that stressful time?
Yeah, one of the things that I try and tell the staff is to find those little moments of pressure relief. It's not like you're going to get a week off in the middle of the season, right? The schedule just doesn't allow it. But it could be something as simple as, hey, you know what? Today was the first day back after a road trip. It's just going to be a short little regen session. Get out of here at 2:00 in the afternoon. You don't need to sit at your desk for a couple more hours doing meaningless paperwork. Save that for another day. Go spend a little bit of a half day. Find your pressure relief valve. It could be you love to work out. It could be you love to go for a bike ride or a hike, or just find that little thing to take that edge off so you can kind of catch up. It's almost like, I guess you could call it microdosing your time off, right? You may not get 2 days off in a row. Like I joke in athletic training, 2 days off is, everybody else calls that a weekend. We call that like a week off in athletic training, right? You get 3-4 days. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm not working this month. This is awesome. So you just got to kind of find those moments to find that relief valve. And, we have enough staff now that we can cover. If somebody has something that comes up, I try to remind them, look, you're a human first, family comes first. Like people get like, oh, I'm sorry, but my mom's sick. I'm like, I don't care. Go. We'll figure this out. Yeah. Right. Like I try to be that boss, and I try to model that for my staff as well, because I think, there are times in pro sports, you're afraid to be that person who says, I need to get out of here for a day, or I need a break. And, it can be hard, but you try and find it. And then I also try and leave them alone in the off season, right? As short as that's gotten, I try to, it's not your traditional, you get 2 weeks paid vacation and that's it. Like our off season can be multiple weeks. And I try to go, look, as long as we're covering the basics of what need to be done, get out of here. I'm not going to sit there and say, hey, hit your time clock. And, you took 21 days off. You only get 20. Yeah. Like, hey, that's not allowed. As long as you get your stuff done and you're ready to go, I'm not going to hound you about that. So try to find that balance.
Now, to be honest, though, when the season's done, do you also take time to just go on a trip? I know I saw you at ISO Kinetic last year, which is
Yeah,
pretty cool.
that's
I didn't
in
go this
season though.
year.
Yeah, that's
That
in
is in
season.
season. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, I
I
didn't think
actually had to
about
take
that.
time away from the season, but no, I try to do that. Like it depends. Like every off season is different. I tell people it's based on how you enter the off season. Did you get knocked out in the first round of the playoffs? Did you not even make the playoffs? You know, there's
Oh,
going to be a larger chunk of time. Guys may be motivated to come in right away and like, no, I got to work hard and be better for next year. Or you may have a number of long-term rehabs that you're still working on that you have
oh
to
yeah.
commit to. So nowadays, like we have three staff on the first team level. I'll use them as the example. So we have a head trainer, we have an assistant athletic trainer, and we have an assistant trainer slash PT. So between
Mhm.
the three of them, they can figure out one of you come in for a week while the other two take some time off, and then
Mhm.
just rotate that. So you try and cover the basics if somebody's needing a long-term rehab through the off season. But a lot of guys like to bug out too because it's their only chance to get away. So,
Yeah.
the more and more guys we get from foreign places, they love to go home, be there for a long time, stay away. So, off
Yeah.
season can be relatively quiet, but then you have other years where you go late in the playoffs and guys are bummed and they're going to be around for the 4 or 5 weeks of off season because it's not enough time to really get away. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it can change year to year.
Now, please tell me during the off season, you and your wife go on a little trip, vacation, something
Yeah, we try
deal.
to get away,
Okay.
she's got family in Colorado, so we're often back there. That's, a favorite place for us to go. I mean, living
Nice.
out here in the West, there's some really cool places. We've
I
made trips
know.
to like Grand Teton, that's like 4 hours north of us.
Yeah.
Moab is 3 hours south, so you have two national parks down there. There's
Yeah.
plenty of places you can get to. It's actually a great place being in Salt Lake. If you like the outdoors, if you like
Mhm.
anything from off-roading, camping, fishing, hiking, skiing, mountain biking, like you have those resources all around you. So
Yeah.
yeah, we try to get away and spend some time. My wife works too, so she's got limited
Okay.
vacation days. So we try and plan those where
Make
we
it
can.
work.
Yeah, and try and get
Okay.
away and like I said, get your chance to decompress. And it's funny being on this side, not traveling, you really do see how the stress of travel can build up because I don't feel some of that nervous anxiety because I'm on the road every 3 days or
Yeah.
all these games. And so I'm trying to check in with my staff on a regular basis, like, hey, are you okay? Do you need a break? Do you need to take
Yeah.
this trip off? And we rotate. We only send two of our medical staff, so two athletic trainers. So
Uh-huh.
one is always staying back for whoever's injured, but then that gives them an extra day and a half off.
Okay. So we're going to switch gears because I know I'm running close to time.
Okay.
But I did want to just ask you about your previous experience. I mean, obviously, you're at the highest of highs, MLS, but then you also had experiences with US soccer, going to these month camps. I'm just curious, you were an athletic trainer then.
Mhm.
What was it like joining in for these very short camps?
Yeah. So first off, I've only had a small experience at the national
Uh-huh.
team. Honored that I got the chance to do it. I mean, I tell people, short of being in the military, this is the closest thing to serving your country that you can do. Right? Is you're there representing your flag. It's on your chest, and so it's definitely a prideful thing to be there. And I was honored that the few times that I got to go in. But yeah, it's a different mentality, right? You have to remember that you've gone up a level, right? Like I work in pro sports, but not every pro plays for their national team. That's a whole
Right.
nother level of elite level.
Mhm.
And you have to remember, like everybody wants to be there, right?
Yeah.
It's the top level. You're getting extra pay. It's a big tournament. There's trophies. So the motivation level I feel like goes up even a whole nother notch
Yeah.
there. So everybody's like on their best game because everybody wants to be there. It's not the, oh, this is my club team, this is my day-to-day job. So
Right.
it's an intense period. A lot of the guys know each other from the league, from the national team. So you gel real quick and you play a bunch of or you have a bunch of training sessions and then you get into one or two games and it's over. So it can be short and intense. So yeah, I mean it's a dream. I was never able to fully turn that into a full-time job at that level,
Yeah.
but the little taste of it that I got was awesome. And I
Yeah.
will forever be thankful to US Soccer for those opportunities. And if they come around again, I'll definitely jump on them.
And just curious because I mean, yes, these jobs are online, but would you say that maybe your previous work and connections helped you even get noticed by US Soccer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was working in soccer. At the time, it was one of the situations where the head trainer for the Galaxy, who I knew was going into a camp, and I got to go in with him.
Mhm.
Shout out to Ivan Piera.
Okay.
So I got a chance to work with him. early on, and then I had another chance later on with Sue Falzoni when she was the head trainer. Sue and I knew each other through her dry needling classes. She knew that I was in
Mhm.
soccer. We remained friends. In fact, I saw her at Isokinetic just a couple weeks ago. So
She was
um,
there,
she
really?
was. Yeah,
Oh
she
my gosh,
presented.
I
Yeah.
missed it.
Yeah, you missed a good one. So when she was in camp, she's like, "Hey, come on in. I want you to, help me out. You know soccer. I'm just getting my feet wet in this." She'd done a multiple other sports, worked with some soccer guys, but it was an
Mhm.
opportunity for me to go in. So yeah, the connections definitely help, and those things build over time. I know people go, "Oh, I don't have any connections." I go, "Well, start making them. Like,
Yeah.
get to know somebody, time and effort, and reach out to people." I mean, I think the world's way more accessible now than it was when I started, right? Like,
Yeah.
look at us. We're internet friends, right?
I
And then we
know.
finally see each other in London, and
I
it's
agree.
or sorry, in Lyon. It's one of
In
those things
Leon,
where
yes.
nowadays kids can pick up social media and find somebody and see who they're following and find more people and then make connections and learn from LinkedIn, and so those connections can be made. You just kind of have to put yourself out there and be ready for to be ignored or rejected. Like, I have people that reach out to me all the time, and I try to get back to as many people as I can, but some people aren't that way. They're not so outgoing. They don't want to deal it with all of that.
Mhm.
But I think younger clinicians now, it's easier to like start making connections because of the
Yeah.
social media and the internet world that we're in versus the old days where if you didn't bump into them or have their phone number, you never knew how to even. I remember handwriting letters to athletic trainers in baseball to try and get an internship.
You
So
know?
it's different now.
Yeah, LinkedIn makes things a lot easier.
Oh
Just
yeah,
send a little message. If they read it, great. If not, we keep it moving. That's
yeah.
actually how my podcast started. It sounds crazy because when I first started it, it was during journalism school, and I had no thoughts of continuing it after journalism school. I just wanted to do it to like gain experience interviewing. But then I was like, no, I want to interview people around the world. And people thought, oh my gosh, how are you going to get to Europe? I was like, oh, we'll do our research on LinkedIn. And
Yeah.
luckily it's worked out. Not that I have a lot of episodes, but we got 31 under my belt now. So, but
Congratulations.
thank you. And 32 after you. But at this camp, even though it's very brief, what is something that you've really soaked in that left you refreshed and also even more motivated coming back to your club that you saw in that experience?
I think anytime you go to a different level, you see how other people do things, you learn a new technique, you see a resource that they have that you've never done. It could be something as simple as, oh my gosh, look at the way that they organize their travel supplies. I could be so much better about how I travel because they travel internationally and I just hop on a
Mhm.
commercial flight and go 2 hours to Los Angeles. So
Yeah.
it could be anything from learning from the staff that you're around to learning about how they do things. Sometimes it's even just how they organize their day. Like
Yeah.
everybody's got a different philosophy about how they train and do things. There's generalizations we all do, but there's
Yeah.
little nuances here or there. And like, be curious, ask those questions. Like, say to the fitness coach, well, why do you do that warm up on match day -1 versus another one? You may learn something that you can then take back and apply. And so, yeah, it's just those interactions with other staff members that you're not around. It's like a neural stimulation, like you're learning and you're seeing new things. And yeah, it's soccer, and I've been in soccer, but it's something new that
Yeah.
I'm learning, and you want to take that with you. It goes back to the wanting to continue to learn. And sometimes it's literally not just being there, but being there and paying attention and being there and asking questions.
Yeah. So being very observant. And speaking of observant, you didn't have this role for too long, but you also switched gears and was on the women's side doing more of like the NWSL medical observer. And I mean, obviously, I don't normally see these jobs like online saying, hey, apply for this medical observer job.
Sure.
Can you just describe what that actually was about
Sure.
and what your role was in that position?
So the NWSL, as part of their health and safety, they have a medical observer at each stadium live in game. So
Hmm.
you're sitting up in a box and you're observing the game from up on high, and you have radios down to the bench. Essentially, it is for concussion observation,
Okay.
right? Like a spotter program, but it can also include other injuries. So your role is to support the athletic trainers that are there, right? You're watching basically from on high, trying
Hmm.
to see what's happening. Because if the play goes the other way, they may not see that this girl behind the scenes took a stumble or is holding her head. So
Hmm.
you each league has a different way of doing it. So NWSL's original plan was to place a medical observer in each stadium to do it. So Typically, it was an athletic trainer, someone with a medical degree who would sit there for the game as a neutral and assist both teams in observing anything that was going on. You'd call on the radio if anything came up, file a report at the end, just say, hey, this is what I saw. Like every league does it differently.
Okay.
Leagues with more money and more technology, like MLS or the NHL, they have spotters who are like at League Central watching, and they're able to call on a radio or a wired link to the sideline. So basically, it was a spotter program, and U.S. Soccer was one of the first ones that kind of introduced like a concussion spotter. I think with my national team experience, this goes back to maybe 2015 camps. They already had a medical observer. One of the medical staff would actually sit on high and call down if they saw something to the medical staff that was on the bench in case they missed it because they weren't watching behind the scenes on the play, so to speak.
Yeah. So would you say athletic trainers most can do this kind of job? Is there any additional training that you think could be beneficial for a medical observer?
Again, it's different. I know the NFL hires athletic trainers and they sit at each venue. There's two of them plus a doctor, I think, that sit up in a booth and watch what's going on. They probably have their own specialized like in-house training of how to do it, how to watch the video. I think it's not really a role that is outside of, the organizations. Cause I think even like collegiate sports, they do it now for like football where they have an observer. It's mainly been athletic trainers because obviously we're the ones that have been around sports and we're the ones that know the mandatory observable signs for concussion, and they can interject in those moments and let the staff on the ground know. But I think it's one of those things that if somebody's interested in it, I don't know many opportunities, but most of them that I know are usually athletic trainers, and it's either the conference or the sports organization, the league it's kind of handling that. But to the best of my knowledge, there's no specialized training that comes with it beyond your athletic training degree.
Okay. Well, finally, because we always have students as well as clinicians that love to hear advice from people that have been there and done that. You said in a podcast, as a athletic trainer or medical professional, win or lose, you still have a job to do. For you, what is the best advice that you'd give a clinician on being able to quickly flip that switch, say if their team doesn't come out with the victory?
Yeah, I think, what I said in that previous podcast is you have a job to do. Like you're there for a reason and you have to remember that. That doesn't mean I get sad when we get knocked out of the playoffs or super happy when we win, but the work of an athletic trainer, like I joke, you don't want to see us working on a game day. You want to see us sitting there doing nothing. Our work is done behind the scenes Monday through Friday and then after the game, right? So I think you just mentally have to be ready to switch to that, kind of like calm demeanor. We kind of talked about that earlier in emergency situations, but it can also be the same in emotional situations. The team's sad, people are angry, but it's like, hey, I still got things I got to do. Like if you're on the road, I got to pack up this training room and then we got to get ready to get to a bus. And I got to make sure that this guy's healthy, that, check on each guy immediately after. There's almost like a mental list of the things you do after a game. It's like, get in the locker room, put your stuff down, listen to the coach speak. Coach leaves, go around, go, hey, I saw you were holding your knee. Are you okay? Come in, let's see it. Do an evaluation, check on it right away. Because sometimes in soccer, we got a 3-day turnaround and you can't go, well, I'll catch up with you in a day. Like when we get back home and whatever, you're losing time. So the preparation for the next game starts the minute the final whistle blows. And so you have to be ready to start thinking about those things going forward. And so I think it's important to flip that switch mentally and be that professional that you're paid to be and focus on what needs to be done. And the task at hand is taking care of the athletes, making sure that you're already aware of what's coming down the pipeline. And I think that's one of the things that's made me successful is always being prepared for what's coming next. You do it enough, you get used to it. And younger clinicians just need to kind of make a mental checklist of, I know this is coming. So at the end of the game, I should do this, this, and this. And then on day one of training, I should be looking for this, this, and this. And then, middle of the week, should be doing these checks. I should be preparing these things for the game. So I used to make like a running list. I called it my master to-do list. And it was just like every day, this is what I have to do. And then there was weekly things I had to do, and then quarterly, and then monthly, and then end of the year. And I would just use that as a reference point until it almost became ingrained in my head of this is what I need to do on a regular basis. And that's how you develop your routine. And I think get more proficient at what you're doing and see what's coming down the road before it shows up.
I agree. I think people, sometimes my friends even give me a hard time. I'm a list girl. I'm a planner.
Yeah.
I have my goals 1 week, a month, and they're just like, just relax. And I'm like, no. This is how I stay focused on what I got to do. So I agree with you. Well, finally, for you, you've done so many roles, from being an athletic trainer, coming all the way up now as a senior director. What gives you the most fulfillment? It's clear you love what you do. You love being in a sport environment, but what truly drives you to even continue to stay in the sports professional setting?
I say this all the time. It's the reason you went into business. It's to help people, right?
Yeah.
And we can get so busy, we can get so technical, we can get so wrapped up in ourselves that we forget about that. But the reality is, we're in the people business. We are in a service profession. We serve others so that they can go on to their athletic glory, and we get to be a part of watching that, like a front row seat. It's the best seat in sports, right? You're right there on the bench, and there's maybe a linesman in front of you, or maybe a coach stalking the sidelines, but otherwise you got a front row view. So you have to remember that it's about the people, and you're there to help them to achieve their goals, so that you collectively can say we've accomplished something. And so I think you have to remind yourself of that, because the longer you do it, sometimes you get jaded to things, or you get burned, or what's the old adage? What's the best thing about the job? The people. What's the worst thing? The people. Like, the reality is, you have to bring yourself back to it is about helping people. It's why you go into any medical profession. You're there to help people. If somebody tells you to go into being a doctor because they want to make money, no, that's probably not their only motivation. Their first motivation is, I want to help people. I want to make people's lives better. And it's the same thing as a physical therapist, athletic trainer, even our strength coaches, nutritionists. All of us are focused on helping people. And so you have to remind yourself of that when things are tough, when you're down, when you're frustrated. You have to remember, this is the job. The job is helping people and being a servant to those folks. And so you just kind of have to remind yourself of that.
I like that. Serving people. I agree. That's why I like being a therapist, because people sometimes are like, are you going to give up being a physical therapist to do journalism? Not saying that journalism, we don't serve our audience by educating them, but I still also find fulfillment in being a clinician, being able to help people. So I like that. Very good way to end it. Well, Theron, I will have to say, this was great. I know awesome. I took more of your time than expected. I did say 60 to 75 minutes, so I went over by 4. So I did pretty good. Okay.
No, this was awesome. I appreciate you inviting me on. This was a lot of fun.
Well, I tell you, I took a lot away from this, even though I'm not an athletic trainer. I think there's so many great qualities and things that made me think about, even as a clinician, that I know many of our listeners will also enjoy. So thank you. And hopefully I see you in another IsoKinetic conference. I went to ACSM conference this year because I'd never been there. And I'm not trying to knock on it. It was great. I learned things, but I was very bummed that I didn't go to London. But was it pretty good? Did you have a good time?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, the venue location was like right in the heart of London, right by Westminster Abbey. As always, it's high quality football medicine. For me, like I had this on my bucket list for like probably 15 years, but because I couldn't get away in the middle of the season, I couldn't go. And to go last year for the first time, I'm like, man, what have I been missing? This is like all the studies that you read, all the authors, all of the professors, all of the team doctors, all of the researchers, like they're there presenting their research. I'm like, oh, I read his paper. I quote his paper all the time. Like, oh yeah, I've seen that guy run on the field. Oh yeah, this guy works for that club. Like, it's just the perfect thing. If you're a football and medicine person, it is like nirvana for you. It's like perfect.
I hear you. I
loved it.
Well, will I see you in Spain next year?
Hopefully, yeah. The plan is to be there. So hopefully we'll be there and we can hang out again.
All righty. And hopefully Stacy, because Stacy's the one that also introduced her. Hopefully she'll be there. I'll give her a shout out. She's great too.
Well, thank you so much for tuning into this episode with Theron Enns. I hope you were able to laugh a little and take away something from it. Now, don't forget, rate, download, share with your colleagues, because more great episodes are coming your way.